I wasn't sure you'd still be here, she said from the porch doorway, leaning against the frame in a sundress that had no business being that simple and that distracting at the same time. Most men see a broken house and run. I set my hammer down, looked at her once. Slowly. Most men aren't landscapers. She smiled. The real kind, not the practiced one. The garden looks good. A pause. So do you? Before we begin, has a quiet moment ever hit you harder than you expected? Leave it in the comments, subscribe, and let's get into it. My name is Callum Reed, 39 years old, handyman and landscaper by trade. The kind of man who fixes what other people break and builds what they can't imagine. I work with my hands because I trust them. Can't always say the same about my judgment when it comes to knowing when to walk away from something. My buddy Briggs will confirm that with a laugh. I've got a small operation, 2 trucks, a trailer, a handful of regular clients. And I've been doing it long enough that I can read a property the way some people read a face. The rot under the eaves. The fence leaning wrong. The garden that used to be loved and isn't anymore. I moved to Halford Road in late April, into a house that needed more work than the listing photos suggested. That suited me fine. A house that needs work gives you somewhere to put your hands every morning. It gives you a reason to be outside, moving, thinking, exactly where I prefer to be. The 1st of May was warm and bright. I was clearing the overgrown bed along the fence line between my yard and the house next door. Thick ivy, old deadwood, years of neglect packed into a single tangle. Gloves on, shears in hand, coffee going cold on the tailgate. Slow, satisfying work. I noticed her on the 2nd day, not because she was beautiful, though she was, but because of how she moved. She'd come out onto the porch, stand at the top of the steps, and scan the street. Left, right, left again. Then she'd check her phone and disappear back inside, like something had pulled her by an invisible rope. She never looked like she was waiting for something good. She had blonde hair, pale gold, the kind that catches light and holds it. On the 3rd morning, she wore a scarf despite the mild spring air. That detail settled something cold in my chest that didn't leave. On the 4th morning, she came out carrying a cardboard box. Her grip kept slipping. She'd reset it, go nowhere, reset it again. I set my shears in the grass so she could see both hands empty and walked toward her slowly, stopping at the edge of the walkway like there was a door I was waiting to be let through. Need a hand? I called. She flinched. Her eyes ran the familiar route, left, right, down the street, before settling on my face. I'm Callum, I said. Bought the place next door. 10 minutes to spare, if you want the help. She hesitated, eyes moving to my truck, my hands, then the street again. When she spoke, it sounded rehearsed. My husband is on a business trip. He hates things being moved, but I need to move furniture. Today, before the weekend. It was Tuesday. Whatever was driving her had nothing to do with the calendar. Her name was Serena. She said it quietly, almost like she was checking it still fit her. Inside, the house was cold in a way that had nothing to do with the AC. Everything was expensive and exactly placed. Cushions in a perfect row, the coffee table at a precise angle, every surface clear of anything personal. Not minimalist. Controlled. The kind of order that isn't about taste. It's about fear. She pointed to the center of the room. A massive dark oak armoire, carved feet, thick back panel, 300 pounds easy. The kind of piece a man buys to fill space and prove he can afford to. Garage or curb, she said. I don't care which. Just out of this room. I got a moving blanket, levered the armoire forward. The wood groaned and the piece shifted. And there it was, on the wall behind it, at head height, a fresh drywall patch. Rough oval of new compound, still slightly lighter than the surrounding paint. Not a contractor's work. Done fast, done quietly, by someone who didn't want questions asked. Serena saw it the same moment I did. Her jaw tightened. Her fingers curled against her jeans. He bought it, she whispered. Not to me. To herself. Not for me. For the room. It's ugly, I said. She blinked. Then, small, real, surprising, she smiled. Not the practiced expression she'd worn at the door. Something that came up from somewhere much deeper. It is, she said, like she'd waited years to hear it. I moved the armoire to the garage in 3 careful passes. She walked ahead the whole time, checking windows, pausing at doorways, quiet as someone trying not to be heard inside their own home. When I came back, she was at the front window, lifting the curtain just enough to see the street. then letting it drop. "You should go," she said. "He calls at 6. I picked up my gloves. "I'm right next door," I said. "You need anything," you yell. One hard nod. The kind that costs something. At exactly 6, her kitchen light came on. Through the curtain, I watched her silhouette pick up the phone and stand rigid. One hand on the counter, shoulders locked, not moving. The call went long. She never loosened once. I sat on my porch with a cold bottle I didn't drink, watching her window, thinking about the patch in the drywall and the scarf in the warm spring air. I wasn't going anywhere. The next morning I was back at the fence line by 7. Not because the ivy needed it. I'd cleared that stretch 2 days prior. I just needed a reason to be outside, close enough to notice if something was wrong. Serena came out around 8 with a watering can, moving through her front beds with the careful, unhurried pace of someone performing normalcy for an invisible audience. She wore a light gray cardigan, sleeves pulled down despite the warmth. She didn't look at me directly, but after a few minutes, she drifted closer to the fence, and I set my trowel down and waited. "He's coming home Saturday," she said, without looking up from her plants. "How much time does that give you?" She didn't answer right away. She moved the watering can to the next cluster of flowers. "Enough to regret a few things. Not enough to fix them." I let that sit. Then I said, "I'm going to be working the side yard today, trimming the hedge line." I nodded toward the narrow stretch of yard that ran between our houses. "If you need anything moved or looked at, you know where I am." She glanced up then, just briefly. "You don't have to keep doing that." "Doing what?" She almost smiled. Almost. Then she carried her watering can back inside, and the door closed softly behind her. I was 2 hours into trimming the hedge when I spotted it. It was mounted on her exterior wall, just under the soffit, angled toward the driveway and front walk. Small, dark housing, the kind that blends into shadow. A wireless camera. I might have taken it for a standard security install if the positioning hadn't been wrong. It wasn't pointed outward, toward the street, the way a camera meant to deter intruders would be. It was angled inward, watching the front door, watching whoever came and went. I finished the hedge. Then I knocked on her door. She answered with that familiar half-second delay, like she was deciding whether the door was safe to open. When she saw me, she stepped back and let me in without a word. "Walk with me," I said. I led her to the front window and pointed up at the soffit without going outside. "That camera, did you put it there?" She looked at it for a long moment. Something moved across her face that wasn't quite surprise. "He said it was for security," she said. "After a break-in on the street. 2 years ago." "There was no break-in on this street," I said. "I checked the county records when I was buying the house. Clean block." She was quiet. "Has he ever mentioned the footage?" I asked. "Referenced something he saw? Asked who came to the door?" Her jaw shifted. That was answer enough. "I want to take it down," I said. "Today? Before Saturday?" "He'll know. He'll know when he checks the feed and it's gone, yes. But right now it's giving him eyes on your front door in real time." I paused. "That's not security, Serena. That's a leash." She folded her arms across her chest, not defensively, more like she was holding herself together while she thought it through. Then she nodded once, sharp and certain. I had the camera down in under 4 minutes. The mounting screws, the wire fed through a drilled hole in the soffit, a small receiver module tucked up behind the fascia board. I bagged all of it, tagged it with a strip of masking tape and a date, and set it on her kitchen counter like evidence, because that's what it was. Then I looked at the smoke detector in the hallway. I don't know exactly what made me check it. Call it instinct, or the logic of a man who understands how things are wired. But the detector was positioned wrong. Not near the kitchen or the bedroom doors where heat and smoke would collect, but dead center of the main hallway, angled slightly. I got a chair, took it down, and opened the back panel. Inside, wired neatly alongside the battery housing, was a small listening device. Compact, professional grade, the kind that doesn't come from a consumer shelf. Serena stood in the hallway doorway watching me. When I held it up, she didn't gasp, didn't cry. She just pressed her lips together in a thin line and looked at the device like she was confirming something she'd already half known and hadn't let herself believe. "He heard everything," she said. "Everything said in this hallway," I confirmed, "and probably most of the main floor." I set it beside the camera on the kitchen counter. 2 items. 2 dates marked in black tape. We sat at her kitchen table for a while after that, not talking much. I drank the coffee she made. The afternoon light came through the window, and lay flat and warm across the oak surface between us. I want to document all of it, she said finally. Before Saturday. I'll bring my camera, I said. We photograph everything. The patch in the wall, the camera mount, the wiring, the device. You keep copies somewhere he can't reach. She looked at the 2 items on her counter with steady eyes. Not frightened. Resolved. Okay, she said quietly. Let's start now. We spent 2 hours photographing everything that afternoon. I worked the camera while Serena held each item steady. The wireless housing, the listening device, the receiver module, the wiring pulled from behind the fascia. Then we moved through the house methodically. The patched wall with a measuring tape beside it for scale, the drilled hole in the soffit, the smoke detector bracket with its extra wiring still visible. She was calm the entire time, focused in the way people get when they finally stop waiting and start doing. When we were finished, she forwarded everything to a cloud account she created on her phone using an email address he didn't know existed. New password, new account, nothing tied to her name or their shared network. That was her idea, not mine. It told me something important, that underneath the careful stillness she moved through every day, there was a sharp and capable woman who had simply been waiting for the right moment. There's a lawyer, she said as I was packing up the camera. A divorce attorney. A friend mentioned her name 6 months ago, and I wrote it down and hid it inside a cookbook he's never opened. She paused. I haven't called her yet. What's stopping you? She looked at her hands on the table. Money. Every account runs through him. Every card, every statement. He sees everything. I thought about that for a moment. You have anything of your own? Anything he doesn't track? She was quiet for a beat. Then, there's a painting in the spare room. Mine, from before we married. A landscape, small, not valuable to anyone but me. Another pause. I looked it up once. It's worth about $1,800. That's a retainer, I said. She looked up at me. Call the lawyer, I said. Sell the painting first if you need to. But call her. She nodded slowly, and I could see her turning it over, testing the weight of it, checking whether it would hold. Whatever she found, it seemed to be enough. That was a Thursday. By the following Monday, a quiet routine had settled between us. Careful, unhurried, built out of small things. I came each evening after my last job, changed out of my work clothes, and tended her garden in the long golden hour before dark. She had neglected beds along the back fence, bare patches near the steps, a climbing rose that needed guidance. I worked through it steadily, and she'd come out after a while with 2 glasses of iced tea and sit on the porch steps while I worked. We talked about ordinary things, the garden, the neighborhood, what the hydrangeas would look like once they filled out. Sometimes we didn't talk at all. The quiet between us was easy, which felt like its own kind of progress. What we were really doing was rebuilding something she hadn't had in a long time. Not romance, not yet. Just safety. The sense that another person could be present without the air changing. Saturday came. Whitfield arrived in a silver Mercedes at 2:30, luggage in the trunk, the engine running longer than necessary in the driveway, the kind of pause that's meant to be felt inside the house. I was in my backyard and stayed there, but I listened. No raised voices. No sounds that made me move toward the fence. He left again by evening. Sunday she came to the fence while I was stacking timber. She looked tired but steady. He noticed the camera was gone, she said. I told him it fell, and I threw it away. He looked at me for a long time. She stopped. He didn't hit me, but he stood close. Very close. And he spoke quietly, which is worse than shouting. Did he touch you? No. He knows better than to leave anything visible right now. He's careful when he's calculating. That word, calculating, told me Whitfield wasn't just angry. He was thinking ahead, which meant we needed to do the same. Monday morning, I mounted a trail camera on my side of the fence, aimed toward the shared side yard and her driveway. Positioned low on a cedar post, half hidden by a bracket. For raccoons, if anyone asked. On Tuesday, I checked the feed and found nothing. Wednesday the same. But the camera was there, recording, and that mattered. Evidence doesn't wait for the moment you decide you need it. On Wednesday evening, she came out to the garden carrying her iced tea and something else, a small slip of paper, which she held out to me without saying anything. I wiped my hands on my jeans and took it. A lawyer's name. A date. Next Friday at 10. I sold the painting yesterday, she said. A gallery on 4th Street. The owner didn't ask questions. She looked out at the hydrangeas I'd staked that afternoon, their heavy heads nodding slowly in the evening air. It felt strange, like letting go of the last thing I owned that was purely mine. "You're not letting go," I said. "You're spending it on the right thing." She looked at me for a moment with an expression I couldn't fully read, something between gratitude and grief, and something quieter than either. Then she sat on the porch steps, wrapped both hands around her glass, and watched the garden settle into the early dark while I finished the last row of planting. Neither of us said anything more. We didn't need to. The lawyer's name was Patricia Holland, and according to Serena, she was exactly the kind of woman you wanted in your corner: quiet, precise, and entirely unmoved by money or intimidation. The Friday appointment went for nearly 2 hours. Serena came home with a folder of documents, a list of next steps, and something in her posture that hadn't been there before. Not confidence exactly, more like direction, like a compass that had finally found north. She told me about it over the garden fence that evening. Holland had reviewed the photos, the devices, the camera mount documentation, and confirmed what we already suspected: the surveillance inside the home was actionable. The drywall patch, combined with the bruising Serena had photographed herself 2 weeks prior, built a picture that was difficult to argue against. Holland's advice was clear: document everything, disturb nothing, and don't move first. Whitfield moved first. It came on a Tuesday, 12 days after the lawyer consultation. Serena called me just after 9 in the morning, her voice flat and controlled in the way that means someone is holding themselves together by will alone. "He filed," she said, "divorce papers this morning." His lawyer called Holland directly. I set down the drill I was holding. "Okay, what are the terms?" "He's naming you," she said, "as an adulterer. He claims you and I have been in an ongoing relationship and that it constitutes grounds." A pause. "He's also frozen every account. Cards, checking, savings, all of it locked pending the proceedings." I leaned against my truck and let that settle. It was a clean move, I had to admit. Name a third party, freeze her resources, force her onto the defensive before she could establish her own footing. He'd thought it through. "Holland?" I asked. She said we expected something like this. She said to stay calm and let her work. Serena's voice tightened slightly. "Callum, he's sending movers. Thursday, with a court order for specific items, furniture, artwork, things he claims are his exclusively. Holland is contesting it, but the order is valid for the listed pieces." "Then we let them take what the order covers, and not one thing more," I said. "I'll be there Thursday." Thursday arrived gray and cool. The moving truck pulled up at 9 sharp, 2 men and a clipboard, professional and indifferent the way hired hands learn to be. Whitfield arrived 20 minutes later in the silver Mercedes. He was tall, well-dressed, the kind of man who treats every room like he owns it, because usually he does. He came up the front walk without hurrying, hands in his coat pockets, and stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. Serena was already on the porch. She stood straight, folder in hand, Holland's number on her phone screen ready to dial. I stood beside her, 1 step back, arms loose at my sides. Whitfield looked at me for a long moment. Something passed across his face: calculation, adjustment, and then he smiled the way men smile when they want you to know the smile isn't friendly. "The handyman," he said. I didn't answer. He shifted his attention to Serena, and his voice dropped into something low, and even that was clearly practiced. "I want this done quietly, for both our sakes." "Holland has the item list," Serena said. "The movers take what's listed. Nothing else enters or leaves." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He wasn't used to being answered like that. He glanced at me again, then back at her, recalibrating. The movers worked for 90 minutes. I stayed on the porch with Serena, and we watched every item that came through the door against the court order list. When one of them reached for a small framed photograph on the hallway table, not on the list, I said his name quietly and shook my head. He said it back without argument. Whitfield stood in the yard, making a phone call for most of it, watching the house with flat eyes. They left by noon. He was the last to go. He stood at his car door and looked up at the house one final time, and what I saw on his face wasn't grief or anger. It was the expression of a man revising his strategy. That evening, the power went out. Clean cut, not a breaker trip, not a grid issue. The neighbor 2 doors down still had lights. I went around to the meter box on Serena's side yard with a flashlight and found it immediately. The main line had been manually disconnected at the exterior junction, a clean pull that took tools and knowledge. Not random, deliberate. I had it repaired in 40 minutes. While I was working, the trail camera on the fence post was running. When I pulled the footage that night at Serena's kitchen table, we had it clearly, a young man in a gray jacket, arriving on foot, tools in hand, working the junction box for less than 3 minutes before walking back down the side street to a waiting car. The car's plates were visible in 2 separate frames. Serena watched the footage with her hands flat on the table, perfectly still. "That's enough," she said quietly. "That's more than enough." I copied everything to 2 drives in her cloud account. Then I looked at her across the table. "You ready to make a phone call?" I asked. She picked up her phone without hesitating. Her grip was steady. "Sheriff's office," she said. "Yes." The deputies arrived within the hour, 2 of them, an older man named Garrett and a younger one who took notes without looking up. Serena met them at the door with the folder Holland had prepared, the cloud account pulled up on her phone, and the kind of composure that comes not from the absence of fear, but from having lived inside it so long that it no longer controls you. She told them everything. The camera mounted to monitor her movements. The listening device wired into the smoke detector. The bruising she had photographed and dated. The power line deliberately cut on the evening following the court-ordered move. She didn't dramatize any of it. She laid it out in sequence, calmly, the way you describe something you have decided the world is going to hear, whether it's comfortable or not. I walked Deputy Garrett around the side yard and showed him the junction box, the tool marks on the exterior casing, the clean pull on the main line, the angle of approach from the street. Then I showed him the trail camera footage on my laptop, right there on the hood of his cruiser in the cool evening air. The young man in the gray jacket. The tools. The timestamps. The silver Mercedes crawling past earlier that same afternoon, plates clear in the frame. Garrett watched the clips twice without saying anything. Then he looked at me with the expression of a man who has seen a lot of things and knows which category this one belongs in. "We have enough to move on a restraining order," he said. "And we'll be paying Mr. Whitfield a visit regarding the vandalism and utility tampering. Cutting a main line like that is a serious charge." After they left, the house felt different. Not empty, clean. Like a window had been opened in a room that hadn't had fresh air in years. Serena went out to the porch swing and sat without saying anything. I followed and leaned against the railing across from her. The night was mild, the street quiet, hydrangeas dark shapes along the fence line. "Holland called while they were here," she said after a while. "Whitfield's attorney reached out this afternoon, before the deputies even arrived. He wants to settle." She looked at her hands. "He doesn't want criminal charges. Doesn't want police visits or court appearances or his name in any public record connected to surveillance devices and utility tampering." She paused. "He'll give me the house if I release claim on the business assets. The hotels, the accounts, the investments, all of it stays with him." "What do you want?" I asked. She looked out at the yard for a long moment. At the bare patch where the armoire had sat in the garage before Briggs hauled it away. At the garden beds where new green was coming up along the fence in neat rows. "I want to sleep without listening for footsteps," she said. "I want to have people over without checking every room first. I want to stand in my own kitchen and not calculate whether the way I'm standing will cause a problem." She exhaled slowly. "He can keep the money. I'm keeping this." "Then tell Holland yes," I said. She did, the following morning. 6 weeks later, on a Thursday in mid-June, I was in her kitchen sanding a new floating island I'd built from reclaimed oak, salvaged boards from a demolished farmhouse out on Route 9, dried and planed and fitted together until they were something solid and new. Fine dust clung to my arms. The sander hummed low. Through the window the yard was full of early summer light, the hydrangeas I'd planted along the back fence blooming heavy and blue against the warm air. Serena came in wearing a soft blue sweater, hair loose, shoulders down in a way that still struck me every time I saw it. The simple, unremarkable ease of a person who is no longer braced for impact. "Briggs is here," she said. "He brought the invoice." "Of course he did," I said. Briggs came through the back door with a six-pack in one hand and a folded paper in the other, looking around the kitchen with the critical eye of a man who builds things for a living and can't turn it off. "Deck lumber, hardware, extra bolts you swore you didn't need," he said, holding up the invoice. "I needed them," I said. He looked over the island, ran a hand along the edge, and gave a single approving nod. "Clean work," he said. "You finally built something that won't embarrass me." Serena laughed, easy and unguarded, the kind of laugh that fills a room. "The divorce is final today," she said. I set the sander down and wiped sawdust from my hands before I reached for hers. Her fingers threaded through mine, firm and certain, and she looked up at me with an expression I didn't try to name. Some things are better left whole than described. Briggs made a loud sound of protest and cracked open a bottle. "Save it for when I've had at least 2 of these," he said. We took the beers out to the back deck. The boards were smooth and solid underfoot, the yard open around us in the warm June evening. The hydrangeas stood full along the fence, their heavy heads moving slightly in the breeze. The air smelled like fresh-cut wood and damp earth and the faint vanilla of her perfume, and somewhere down the street a lawnmower ran and shut off, and the quiet that followed was the good kind, the kind that belongs to no one and costs nothing. Briggs raised his bottle. "To not whispering in your own kitchen," he said. Serena touched her bottle to mine. Her grip was steady. Her eyes were clear. I carried boxes, I thought. She carried everything else. She rose on her toes and kissed me slowly, the kind of kiss that doesn't check over its shoulder. Anyone could have looked in and seen it through the window. That was exactly the point. The fear was gone. The quiet that replaced it was ours. Thanks for watching. If this story meant something to you, please like and subscribe for more unforgettable stories about love, resilience, and second chances.